30 days. So
That takes
they can
longer.
read it. Yeah, I mean, here, and very transparent. So she's like, no, and they're like, why? No,
Yeah.
great. It's always hard.
I mean, I think I haven't heard
I
anything,
haven't,
but
yeah, because we just want to be like,
good. How are you?
this is you.
Oh no.
It's okay.
I know.
So
I'm doing a little bit of that. Too often. Figured it's a good idea.
yeah, that's true. I mean, we put it out. I mean, also if it goes, you know, for so.
Because then you probably get reimbursed for things like this.
Yeah.
It's funny because my dad was like, whenever I do do a citation, I always have to bill from Nathanson. So it's like from Linde to crash it. I mean, that's not, it's not very far, but actually it took me forever to get there because it's like whatever, it's a small thing, but
Just like traffic, right?
well, that's been my most recent project.
What actually?
It's just like a reconnaissance survey because they're redoing foundation.
Okay.
But so most of the time they're underfoot, which I do find a bit for somebody that doesn't much stuff, which is kind of exciting.
That is
So I get to do it in OE. But yeah, it's pretty neat. It was weird too because I was like just pretty much and no, like have you ever met Dana Dumbler?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
so Dana owns it.
so yeah. Of course you know.
Yeah.
There's a pretty similar bones in art that
Yeah, so he owns it, so should be pretty easy to get in there because he's very willing to.
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he wants it listed. So he's kind of on the same
He
page.
can probably just pay you his teaching
Well, that's he has to find it. It's in a folder somewhere, and he doesn't know where. But anymore, he's just on the ice there. The sun's dying out, and he's like, "Oh gosh, it's time for answer." So it's really not much easier.
Yeah, we did the first feature with students was just like, yeah, we should read it's really hard to distinguish between records and everything, or records are very broad and have like life changing.
All right, we're going to get started. Welcome to tonight's distinguished alumni lecture in the Department of Art History. I'd like to extend a special welcome to those of you joining us online. We're really glad we're able, thanks to Audio of the Arts, to offer this in hybrid format. So I'm Anna Andrzejewski. I'm a professor in the Department of Art History. And I also have the distinct honor of chairing the Centennial Celebration Committee, and I'll talk a little bit more about our centennial in a second. I want to thank our sponsors responsible for allowing us to bring this event to you, as well as other events associated with our centennial. We're deeply grateful for the support of the Anonymous Fund on campus, as well as generous support from the Dean's Office in the College of Letters and Science, as well as our generous donors to the department. We could not do this without any of them. I also want to acknowledge our partnership tonight with our co-sponsor, the Chazen Museum of Art. We're deeply grateful for you hosting us in this wonderful space, and there is a reception to follow that our partners have allowed us to use the Chazen lobby, so we're really thankful for that. Tonight's lecture is on top of being part of our recruitment event for future graduate students in our department. It's also part of a series associated with our centennial year. We are, during the 24-25 academic year, hosting a series of panel discussions with distinguished alumni in our department. And part of this, let's be honest, is to toot our own horn and celebrate our successes, the successes of our past graduates, but we're also inviting them to join us to think about the future. This is a chance for us to reflect on our great legacy, but also look ahead and think about our next 100 years. And who better to do that with than our guest tonight, you'll hear from shortly, Linde B. Lehtinen. But before I turn the mic over to my colleague, Professor Jill Chazen, I just want to extend an invite to everybody here to join us for another event in this series that we have over the next few days. A panel discussion tomorrow, Friday, February 7th at 4:30 in this very auditorium. Dr. Lehtinen and two other distinguished alumni will be participating in a panel discussion on transforming curatorial practice. We also have another event that you will hear about if you follow us on social media and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which everyone in this room should do. Our next alumni event will be April 3rd and 4th, and the theme is not unrelated to what we're talking about over the next few days. The theme for this third and final panel, alumni panel, will be Campus Art Museums as Learning Labs. So stay tuned. Please sign up for our newsletter if you don't get it, and follow us on social. And then finally, I would be remiss if I did not tell you that we are officially marking the department's 100th anniversary, September 25th and 26th, 2005. We will have a big party as well as a symposium with some exciting themes that, again, look back at our past, but also ahead toward our future. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Professor Jill Chazen, to introduce tonight's speaker.
So it's my genuine honor to welcome you all and to have the chance to introduce our distinguished alum lecture by Linde B. Lehtinen, Philip D. Nathanson, Senior Curator of Photography at the Huntington, who will be sharing her wisdom with us in this evening's lecture, Reimagining Collections and Communities, Charting a Curatorial Path. I have this honor in large part because I'm Director of Graduate Studies, which means that I also get to thank you all for this opportunity to celebrate together and to thank our dedicated core of faculty and graduate students and an extraordinary administrative team, our brilliant department administrator, Peggy Hacker, this welcome event's visionary organizer, graduate program coordinator, Teddy Call, and our administrative assistant and event planner extraordinaire, Jane McCarthy, without whose tireless efforts this evening would not be possible. And my thanks go as well to the team from Avenue for the Arts who are handling our tech. And let's please give them all a round of thanks. So I'm pleased to see us gathered together for this special occasion and to welcome to campus, both in person and virtually, visiting prospective graduate students. The department is, again, I'm going to remind you, hosting a welcoming reception immediately following this lecture, just in the lobby of the Chazen, and again, thanks to the Chazen. The launching of this key part of the graduate program in Art History's Professional Development Initiative was initially made possible in part by special support from the UW-Madison Graduate School. The Distinguished Alum Lecture event serves to bring prominent alumni of our program back to share their knowledge with our community, and we've begun with a focus on curatorial and museum professions. The Distinguished Alum Lecture has four main goals, demonstrating the relationship between the cultivation of expertise in our graduate program in art history and training for professional careers, providing a formalized framework for near-peer mentoring, offering network opportunities, and showing the arc and breakdown of some of the stages behind a major career. And as you've also heard, this evening forms part of the celebration of the department's centennial, and we look forward to the prospect of seeing some of you all joining us this spring or in the fall. So now to the introduction. This evening, I'm thrilled to introduce our distinguished alum guest, Linde B. Lehtinen, Philip D. Nathanson, Senior Curator of Photography at the Huntington. Dr. Lehtinen is responsible for the Huntington Library's vast photography collection of nearly 1 million images. She received her BA in art history from the University of Chicago and her MA in 2005 and PhD in 2014 in art history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's worked for several museums, including the Getty, the Skirball Cultural Center, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. At SF MoMA, Lehtinen curated an exhibition on artist Elad Lasri and helped organize a range of exhibitions on photography and photographers, including a show on Mike Mandel and a major retrospective on the late Southern California photographer Larry Sultan. She co-curated the 2018 exhibition, The Train, RFK's Last Journey, presenting through photography a poignant documentation of the events of June 8th, 1968, the day when former U.S. Attorney General and presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy's body was transported from New York City to Washington, D.C. following his assassination. While at SF MoMA, Lehtinen pursued collecting initiatives for contemporary Hong Kong and Filipinx photography. She served as a member in Collections and Exhibitions Project team leader for the museum's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion core team. And before working at SF MoMA, Lehtinen held a number of museum positions in that capacity, for example, including as research assistant and library assistant at the Getty Research Institute. And at the Skirball, she was the installation curator for Monsonar, the wartime photographs of Ansel Adams that I recently had need to consult, and curated the accompanying exhibition Citizen 13660, The Art of Mine Okubo. Lehtinen's research interests include Asian and Asian American photography, especially from the Philippines and its diaspora, photography of California in the West, and archives in contemporary art. She's published numerous articles and presents regularly on diverse topics, ranging from histories of the photo book to decolonizing practices in photography. She's currently co-curating exhibitions, which I believe we'll be hearing about tonight, which open in 2026 for the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, entitled The Land Is, and a series of California-based work by Chicana photographer Laura Aguilar, an example of which we see on our screen, recently acquired by the Huntington. Thank you, Dr. Lehtinen, for your presence with us this evening. We're really grateful you're here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jill, for that generous introduction. And thank you. Oh, this is floating a little bit, but I'll let that. And thank you, Anna, as well, for the introduction and for all of your work on the special programming for this lecture. Also, a thank you to my advisor, Professor Barbara Binger, for the support and guidance that you've given me throughout my time here as well, and that is part of the reason why I'm on this stage today. So thank you for that. So I titled my presentation Reimagining Collections and Communities because I see the two terms, collections and communities, as closely intertwined. And I'll look today at about how I've tried to navigate and in many ways nurture this relationship throughout my curatorial career. I'm also going to speak to the reimagining part. This for me signals an effort to reconsider what constitutes a collection in a museum or institution and to push against certain boundaries or traditions. It also prompts new understandings of how communities are formed and even transformed as a result of these changes. So this image here, which is part of the Huntington's collection, offers an example of some of these shifts taking place. It's a photograph by the artist Laura Aguilar entitled Grounded, number 118, made in 2006 to 2007 and printed later in 2018. The photograph is arranged in a triptych featuring Aguilar herself lying at the center where she seems to merge with the earth beneath her. The two images on either side feature desert grasses and California fuchsia plants. It's a disorienting work in the way it splits into different segments and is taken from a slightly angled aerial perspective. We're at once aware of Aguilar's nudity as much as we have a sense that she's resisting certain conventions of the nude form. Her face is not visible, so there's an anonymity to the scene that's unsettling. The rocky terrain and plants cast speckled dark shadows across the composition to animate the brown and green landscape like a constellation or aura around her body. Grounded is the last series of nude self-portraits in nature completed by Aguilar before her passing in 2018. Throughout her career, Aguilar's photographs explored a variety of themes and subject matter, from lesbian and Chicana identity to interventions with the Western landscape to underrepresented communities of Los Angeles. She chose Joshua Tree National Park as a backdrop for this photograph because she felt a deep affinity with this landscape. In fact, her ashes were scattered in Joshua Tree by her friends based on her final wishes. So this is about loss and light and being absorbed into the land as much as it's about taking solace and sustenance from it. It's about finding your way into a space that lets you be who you want to be. So yes, I've used some formal analysis here that I learned in my time here to get some of the things that draw me to this photograph and that make Laura Aguilar and her work such a touchstone for some of the topics that I'll talk about tonight. Deep dive here into the archive. So I thought I'd take you into some of my journey from getting the PhD here at UW-Madison to actually embarking on a curatorial path, so you can understand what's involved in the process from a practical as well as aspirational standpoint. I'm going to talk about my role as a photography curator and how I work with collections and different forms of community. I'll discuss what I've been doing at the Huntington since my arrival a few years ago and some key projects that are underway. I went back into my own archive to dig up this gem. This is a young Linde Brady as a graduate student, posing proudly in front of a museum label that I had the chance to write for Glenn Adamson's class called Slipware Traditions. It was a seminar based on the show he was doing for the Milwaukee Art Museum on liquid slip, clay mixed with water, and its many uses within decorative arts and ceramics. And this is the label that I wrote for the seminar. Don't worry, I'm not going to read it. But classes like this, the fact that all of my art history coursework took place within a museum, had a huge impact on how I plan to use my degree to become a curator one day. Being in contact with a university collection and having an opportunity like this to participate in collaborations with the Milwaukee Art Museum was thrilling. You can see I'm giddy. Maybe I'm being a little shy in the photograph, but I'm very proud that that's on the wall. So after writing my MA thesis on institutional critique practices of artists Mark Dion and Fred Wilson, I got a summer internship with a stipend at the Guggenheim in New York, working with photography curator Jennifer Blessing. And I was able to learn a lot from that experience and come back to Madison ready to embark on more focused PhD coursework about the history of photography with a focus on American and European modernism. The fact that I could tailor my studies here based on the interest in photography that I developed during my internship was also critical and a real turning point for me, and it made me feel very supported. So after I finished my preliminary exams, I went on to do a paid graduate internship at the Getty Museum in the photography department, which gave me the opportunity to work more closely with photographs and collections. And the plan was to come back to Madison after 1 year, but that did not happen. I ended up getting a job as the research assistant at the Getty Research Institute, where I worked in collection development there, but also conducted my dissertation research on American modernist photographer Paul Outerbridge, whose archive was located there. I have always been interested in the circulation of photography, especially as it's reproduced on the printed page. And so these are just some examples that were part of the archive there and his preparatory drawings for photographs that he later took. And it was a way I used this collection to inform my understanding of his photographic process. I got a lot of my training in archives, both at the Getty and the Research Institute, and I worked there for a total of 5 years. And while I was there, I contributed to a number of projects, including an exhibition on German photographer August Sander. I also researched post-war Southern California art and archives, and worked as curatorial assistant, cataloging the extensive Robert Mapplethorpe collection that you see here at the Getty Museum, all the while plugging away at my dissertation on Paul Outerbridge, which I completed in 2014. My first assistant curator role was at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles, where one of my most fulfilling projects was as managing curator, as was mentioned in the introduction of the exhibition Manzanar, the Japanese American incarceration camp as photographed by Ansel Adams. As part of my research, it was important to go to the historical site to feel the wind and the conditions and the harsh environment that the people went through that had to be incarcerated there. I attended the Manzanar pilgrimage. I listened closely to families and those directly impacted by this history. I wanted to give voice to these portraits that were taken by Adams. So I consulted archives at UCLA, at the Bancroft Library, as well as oral histories to give more dimension and narrative to the photograph. And you can see here in the actual exhibition, featuring pamphlets and other ephemera, we also included monitors playing next to the corresponding photograph, as much as we could do. I worked closely with the Manzanar Historic Site, as well as Japanese American National Museum and Densho to weave the stories together, hopefully responsibly and comprehensively as much as I could. And I also wanted to add the work of Toyo Miyatake, who was himself incarcerated in the camp and secretly built a camera to take photographs even though it was forbidden to do so. Eventually, that restriction was lifted, and Miyatake was designated official camp photographer and granted the freedom to take photos of everyday life in Manzanar. I also added the work of Dorothea Lange, whose photographs had the word impounded, if you look really closely at the bottom there, written on the bottom, essentially censored by the government for being too revealing of the conditions of the camp. So to me, the photographic object and all of the context and writing and physicality around it are essential to telling the full story of an experience, and in this case, of a community. I soon transitioned to working as assistant curator of photography at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art in late 2015. And it was around this time that I started to build a greater awareness of the seminal texts that I had used in grad school on the left, like Barth, Sontag, and Newhall. These were being critically rethought and reevaluated by texts that you see on the right, by authors such as Tina Kampt, Ariel Azoulay, and Mark Seeley, with titles such as Unlearning Imperialism and Decolonizing the Camera. I'll say that my approach to photography is very much informed by all of these voices in many ways. I do appreciate those scholars such as Kampt who suggest that we listen to images and that, quote, every photograph has a genealogy and a context that changes its meaning. I had an opportunity also to do an online workshop during the pandemic on a topic of decolonizing photography, and that also expanded my thinking on what it means to care for a photography collection and the power and potential of photography in the 21st century. For me, decolonizing can be destabilizing, refusing, restructuring histories of photography, and that has really become my goal as I continue my curatorial work. A lot of these issues came into play as I worked with different artists and different artist communities at SF MoMA. The way that artists can intervene with a collection and with institutional space is extremely important to the work that we're doing. This is artist Kenyatta A.C. Hinkle, who located West African ethnographic images that were found in carte visites and postcards, and then enlarges them and applies collage, glitter, paint, and other materials, even old issues of vintage National Geographic magazines, to enact what she calls a reversal of the colonial gaze on Black bodies. Here's another view of her work with the original postcards that she's been using and transforming. You see the layers of collage in the painting, and she interrupts these narratives of empire in order to remix and reimagine and retrieve the subjectivity of the individuals captured in the postcards. I work closely with Kenyatta and learned that these types of images also can't go to just anyone as part of a collection. She also listens to the images and listens to the individuals from the past. In some cases, they tell her where they want her to go. Sometimes they need to stay in her studio. Sometimes they need to go to a friend, to another artist. But she has a very careful way in which she wants these to actually be in the world once she has had her time with them. She utilizes a term in her work that she calls the historical present. And it's become a mantra for her practice in which she strives to examine what she calls the residue of history and how it affects our contemporary perspective. So living and working in the Bay Area also gave me the chance to connect in more meaningful ways to my own Filipino-American community. And I began exploring how to bring work from the Philippines into the collection at SF MoMA. After doing studio visits to the Philippines in 2018, I was able to bring the work of Poklong Anading into the collection, and it was included in a show called Constellations, which you see installed on the right. The series is actually called Anonymity, and it features photographs displayed in light boxes, featuring individuals that Poklong meets along the way during his travels, but also some acquaintances. And he has them hold up a circular mirror reflecting the glare of the sun so that it creates a light burst, both obscuring their features, but also emphasizing the details of place and environment around them. Another thing to note about being in the Bay Area and working at cultural institutions is that the majority of security guards at SF MoMA and actually other museums in the Bay Area are from my mom's specific province of Pampanga in the Philippines. This was something that I was, throughout my time there, trying to very hard to come to terms with, and what I could do with that connection, and what it meant for me in terms of community and my role as a curator. I'll get to that soon, but I wanted to put that out there now, as this is part of my thinking process and part of how I was reflecting on where I stood in all this too. I also worked with the artist Irina Alejo, who you see here on the left during our installation, who explores labor, displacement, family, and communal history in their work. They're a third-generation renter and grew up in different parts of San Francisco in the Excelsior, Mission, and South of Market districts, and experienced firsthand the effects of gentrification. Based on this personal history, their artistic practice integrates photography, performance, grassroots organizing, activism, and cultural preservation. And SF MoMA commissioned a number of local artists during this pandemic time as part of a series called Bay Area Walls. And for their SF MoMA commission, my ancestors followed me here. Irina examined the textures and landmarks and people along Mission Street during a time when so many businesses were affected by the pandemic. They spoke with shopkeepers, visited small business owners, and tried to understand what were the constraints, what were the problems, and what were the issues that they were facing during this moment. Irina spoke specifically with the woman on the right, Tita Tess, who runs a Filipino food restaurant in the Mission. Irina did the interview in Tagalog and learned about the struggles that Tess faced as an immigrant working hard to make it in the United States. And it was very important to Irina that the voices of multiple people could be heard through all of the works in the show. So they collaborated with artists and translators to listen, gather the stories behind each photograph, and include original interviews in English, Spanish, and Tagalog on the wall labels. Several of Irina's works were then later acquired by SF MoMA for the collection, including this one. We also had a community event with this as part of this exhibition. And so this is some of the gathering here. And this included a joyful, joyful day, as well as this piece, which is the TNT Tricycle, a custom-built motorcycle with an attached sidecar. It is a common transportation system in the Philippines. And in this case, it is a public artwork and mobile sculpture that's intended to signal the presence of the Filipino-American community. And it's led by the artists Mike Arcega, Paolo Asuncion, and Rachel Lastimosa. And it's located around the Soma Pilipinas Cultural Heritage District in San Francisco. They literally take it around and drive it. Oh, and there's a karaoke machine installed in it as well, as a form of community interactivity. So this brought so many different members together of the community, not just the Filipino community. Kids were dancing, there were smoke machines, it was incredible. And we really had an incredible time seeing all the people come out. And then here were the security guards who were able to also be a part of it and engage with it, and in this case, pose with the tricycle, and also sing songs, in karaoke songs in Tagalog. So since then, SF MoMA has even gone further with this. They had a Pasita Abad show recently where they directly involved members of the Filipino security staff in the content and programming for the exhibition. So it's been really remarkable to see the deep connections that are being made between the museum and local communities there. So how do I go from SF MoMA and smoke machines and karaoke to a place like the Huntington in San Marino, California, adjacent to Pasadena? So I had been to the Huntington a few times while living in Southern California, but it wasn't until I entered into this role as senior curator of photography that I really understood the scope and complexity of this place. It's very different from SF MoMA in that it is a collections-based institution and research-based especially. I often describe it as a hybrid place. It has a garden, it has a museum, and a library. And the library alone has some 12 million items spanning the 11th to the 21st century. My curatorial colleagues cover areas such as history of science and medicine, medieval manuscripts, literary collections and rare books, British history, Pacific Rim, and so much more. Even within the garden, there is a curator of roses, just to give you a sense of the breadth and activity that are going on there. For those who are not familiar perhaps with how the Huntington began, Henry Edwards Huntington and his uncle Collis Huntington were leaders in building the early railroads. And in 1902, 2 years after the death of Collis, Huntington transferred the headquarters to Los Angeles from the East Coast and bought the San Marino Ranch, which is now the Huntington. He then married Arabella, who was the widow of Collis, in 1913, and together they amassed extensive library, art, and botanical collections that they made available to the public in 1919 and that continue to evolve today. These are some autochromes from our collections here that just give you a glimpse of some of those early days at the Huntington in the 1920s of the Desert Garden. And then on the right is a beautiful portrait of Anna Hyatt Huntington, who was actually a sculptor and a wife of a Huntington, another Huntington relative. So it's a complex family and institutional history that, again, as a curator, that I'm constantly contending with, but also fascinated by to some extent. So where did the photography collection begin at the Huntington? When Henry Huntington established the repository to house his collection, he did not necessarily seek out photographs to collect. He was really much more interested in certain topics that interested him. If it happened to be in a photograph, that was fine. But in most cases, the photographically illustrated books are really the early core of the greatest acquisitions on which we eventually built the collection. This is a page from William Henry Fox Talbot's Pencil of Nature, the first commercially published book illustrated with photographs. And it was conceived by Talbot as a synopsis of the potential for photography and its different applications or uses. After Huntington's death, photographs only appear in the annual reports, which began in 1928, as miscellaneous material and ephemera. Again, this is just what we deal with as photo curators. In fact, in those early years, photography collections were never purchased outright, and they most often came with collections of papers and manuscripts. They were then commonly sifted out of collections and put in a separate storage area. Many institutions at this time, not just Huntington, viewed photography as illustrative or tangential, something that needed to be separated from other material. And as we know, this is a vastly different view now in the field. A good part of our collection tells stories of early Los Angeles, the landscape and industry and the infrastructure of the railroads, and how it turned from these more rural spaces to a metropolis. And here are just a couple of examples of stereo views from our collection, featuring this kind of bucolic Pasadena on the left there by Carlton Watkins, and then the railroad by Alfred Hart, who was the official photographer of the Central Pacific Railroad. The Huntington is also the world's great repositories for the work of Carlton Watkins, a boyhood friend of Collis Huntington, who was the uncle of Henry Huntington. And Watkins made over 1,300 mammoth plate pictures, such as the one you see here of Yosemite Falls, and thousands more stereographs and smaller format pictures. And over the years, the Huntington has continued to add Watkins to their holdings, and right now we have over 1,000 Watkins photographs. One of the signature photographs of the collections is this one of peaches. As many, almost more famous than his landscapes, one might argue. It's from an album illustrating the agricultural industry of Kern County, California. And the photographs were made by Watkins on multiple trips to the area around 1881 and 1889. They include views of agricultural crops, livestock, farm workers, so it's not just these peaches, but these are the ones that have certainly stuck in people's mind, and rightly so. They're packed tightly into these 4 rows. My predecessor, Jenny Watts, once described these as baby's bottoms in a box, which is still one of my favorite descriptions of this image. It's a photograph that's so detailed, so lush, yet absolutely absorbing. You can't tell whether Watkins took it from above or from the front, but we know that the peaches were shipped to his studio in San Francisco so he could compose this on his own terms, which I think is an interesting detail. So I also wanted to share where the majority of the photographs are stored and just show you a slice of what my day-to-day looks like, trying to get a handle of these 1 million photographs, whether it's presenting to donors, looking and trying to show them how to use stereo viewers, to trying to get elementary students to understand what a daguerreotype is. These are the kinds of things that I love about my role there. It's a service role in many ways. It's a way to show people and educate people about what we have, and using this by teaching through the collection is one of the privileges of my job, and something that I learned how to do here through the art history program. We also have a lot of large-scale collections, corporate archives, local photography studio archives. These are just some examples of things that we have. The Dick Whittington collection, the Southern California Edison collection, which is a vast and rich archive of the infrastructure of Los Angeles. And then the Maynard Parker collection, he was a Los Angeles-based architectural and garden photographer, did a lot of work for shelter magazines, such as House Beautiful, and design publications in the mid-century. So Henry Huntington's photographs also, and his interests include the Southwest, and particularly of Native Americans. And it's thought he actually intended to establish an exhibition room exclusively dedicated to photographs on the subject. In 1924, he purchased 2 significant collections of Native American photography, the work of Carl Moon and Frederick Monson, who were both active in the Southwest at the beginning of the 20th century, documenting various tribes in this decidedly very overly romanticized and pictorialist fashion. These are obviously very complex images with a history that points to many different questions of agency, especially the fact that the majority of photographs in our collection are taken by non-Native people. And that is something that I continue to contend with. One way to begin to acknowledge that complexity is to work with contemporary Native voices, and these are artists who have been in the art museum collection and are on display now, actually, in a show called Borderlands. And these are the works by Mercedes Dorme and Cara Romero. Mercedes Dorme is Gabrielino Tangba and draws on languages and traditions and practices of her ancestry to reclaim material and narrative relationships to the land. And then Cara Romero is a citizen of the Chemehuevi Indian tribe in the Mojave Desert. And this photograph was taken in Hermosa Beach with her daughter to represent creation stories. I also wanted to point out that it's not just about bringing contemporary voices to sort of have responses to archives. That is an important part, but one thing that I'm also learning is that it's about looking more closely at the details from the images themselves. Here are 3 variants of the same image by Watkins, all in our collection. They have different formats featuring a native dwelling in San Gabriel, California. The left is a cabinet card, and then the middle is a loose photograph that was found within an album, and the third is a photograph that was made for a commissioned album to depict the property of L.J. Rose, who owned a vineyard and citrus groves in the area. I was actually able to meet with members of the Gabrielino Tangba and who saw this, and they noted details that I would never have noticed before. For instance, if you see on the right of the actual dwelling, those loosely structured thatches, that's actually where the animals were kept. The bent tree in the background would have intentionally been bent by those native to the area as a trail marker. And oak trees in particular are easier to bend as saplings, so this also means that this tree and these people would have been here for a much longer time. It was also explained to me that the tree and the way it's bent eventually came to serve as a lookout during this period when bounties were placed on their heads during an 1850 act legalizing indentured servitude of California Native Americans. So this is just one example of what we're beginning to piece together and how we can work directly with community members to reinterpret photographs and their histories. In looking to iconic figures such as Watkins, some of the recent additions that I've been able to make to the collection are by contemporary photographers responding to historical material using 19th century photographic processes. Here's an example by the artist Bin Dan, who is a Vietnamese American, and he explores landscape and memory, but uses the daguerreotype process in a very specific way. He's interested in national landmarks, but how they relate to a nation of immigrants, as he calls it. And we were able to acquire 2 different works of his and their connection to Yosemite. This is one that almost looks like it could be from the time. And then another one that actually features, if you look closely, it says no parking. And then you can see some of the blurred people, indicating again how much has changed, both with tourism and with even the practice of landscape photography. We also have early examples of survey photography, including the work by Timothy O'Sullivan and William Bell, shown here in 2 examples. They were part of the survey teams in the Western United States assigned to develop maps and other documents of the West that would illustrate sites for future railroad construction and settlements. And this photograph on the left in particular, it's a very complicated work, but it was produced for George Wheeler's survey of the 100th meridian, and it features a Spanish text that's inscribed on the rock in 1726 essentially immortalizing the acts of the Spanish in the West. And superimposed on this is a ruler that O'Sullivan has placed there for scale. And you'll notice that he actually had to cut off the leaves of the yucca plant in order to expose both the inscription as well as the points on the ruler. Elizabeth Hutchinson, who was a scholar I was introduced to for the first time in Anna Andrzejewski's mapping seminar class, has referred to this photograph and the way this rock has been manipulated over time as a kind of autograph book for colonizers. Again, what I actually am fascinated about with the collection is just that as much as we can have this set of images and histories, we can also bring in the work of William Camargo, who has done a direct piece that relates to survey photographs. In this case, he's made a suite of images working with Barrett Oliver in order to make them in the 19th century albumin printing process. So this is a series called Origins and Displacements, which includes self-portraits of Camargo, holding signs with bold statements about gentrification, immigration and labor issues, as well as histories of violence experienced by Mexican, Chicanx, and Latinx people in Southern California. And he pairs them with these still lifes from around his hometown of Anaheim. This image on the right is actually the corner of his mother's bedroom. And I was so pleased to see William Camargo up in the galleries right now, as well as Laura Aguilar. So I love the connection there. He researched different locations and sites to uncover hidden histories and events that happened there, and his gestures are another form of intervention and protest. So I've also been doing a lot of material, a lot of research on the materials related to the history of the Philippines in our collection as part of an initiative to expand already a very compelling visual and manuscript collection that we have, which spans much earlier than some of the material I did at SF MoMA. It really starts to look even at early European contact in the 16th century, and this is material that we already have in the collection, into Spanish and American colonial rule and into the era of independence beginning in the mid-20th century. We were able to acquire this rare and substantial collection of 216 photographs consisting of these incredibly vivid scenes and studio portraits taken in the Philippines from as early as 1858 to 1910. And the collection ranges again in subject matter from city streets and shops to lush countryside to indigenous groups, family gatherings, religious customs, even the aftermath of natural disasters. This image on the right depicts a woman of mixed Indian and Philippine ancestry, and she's been labeled over the years as the Indian maiden as a result. And so, again, we're sort of thinking too about different activities in the Philippines and different histories of photography in the Philippines and the type of studios that were embedded in the Philippines and how they were being captured and photographed at this time. This particular one has remarkable presence, and it's a little different because she's dressed rather informally, especially when you compare it to the group of women in the lower left. And so they've actually speculated about this work that either it might have just been too hot, or that she is not of the upper class. And so that's another thing that we have a lot of research to do in terms of the identity of this person and who she was. So other than archives in Spain and the Hispanic Society in New York, this type of early photography of the Philippines is relatively unavailable in US collections, much less West Coast institutions. So I'm really trying to work to make the Huntington a major resource and center for interdisciplinary studies of the Philippines. I've also been adding work. This collection is a substantial one of over 800 real photo postcards of the Philippines. And this is just a sampling here, including different people and communities, cultural gatherings, again, these great portraits, in this case, of beauty queens. And it spans the transition from the end of the Spanish colonial government through the decades of American administration. You can also see in a lot of them, there are inscriptions. They were sent to places as far as Portugal, Honolulu, San Francisco, Berkeley. There's one from Sioux Falls. So thinking too, how did these move in the world? Why was someone sending a picture of a Filipino beauty queen to Hong Kong? Why was this actual image on the left, on the lower left, is a community moving a house for a neighbor. And it's actually in the Philippines, it's known as bayanihan. And that's literally what they are actually moving a house, but there's also a spirit of bayanihan that means it's helping others and not expecting anything in return. So why are they sending this out? So there's a lot of questions I have about this, and it really does allow me to connect a lot of different histories together as I try to uncover what's here. And I'm not the only person interested in this work, so there are already artists and different researchers who are frequently requesting this material, which is also exciting. Jason Roblando on the left is an artist and professor from Normal, Illinois, who makes work based on archival images from American colonial period in the Philippines. And GJ on the right is working on foodways in the Philippines. And so it's been an exciting process to witness as I see these collections being brought to light and becoming more activated by different folks. This is a very recent acquisition. To our collection, I worked with a local Filipino-American artist. Her name is Valerie Bauer. And she is actually a zine maker, but we convinced her to make some photographs and a special portfolio for our collection here. She brought this portfolio together talking about historic Filipino town, which is an area, a neighborhood in Los Angeles. And she put together this piece that not only looks at different markets and businesses that are uniquely Filipino in that section of the city, but it's also an homage to food distributors and farm workers, and referencing histories too of Central California farm workers who worked in Delano during much of the 1965 Delano grape strike. So different references there to history, so I'm just showing you a few examples. I'm also interested in collaborating with other museums and institutions to support local artists' work, especially ones who have been under-recognized and who've been working for a very long time. We collaborated with the Getty and LACMA to acquire a group of work by Connie Samaras, who you see there beaming. She's a Los Angeles-based artist who uses photography to explore landscapes, architecture, the built environment, science fiction narratives, as well as technology. And this is from her series called Edge of Twilight, which was shot in an all-woman, predominantly lesbian RV retirement community located in the US southwestern desert. And she actually protects the location in part because she does not want to endanger the lives of these women, which is a very incredibly difficult and hard reality, of course, that we have to think about. She shoots close-ups of the RV homes on film late at night under the park safety lights, and it gives it this sort of eerie, kind of unearthly quality. She's also made this work of a commercial space station in the construction phase. And on the right, JPL during the station fire of 2009, which is all too close to what has just happened in Los Angeles with the recent fires. But it demonstrates the cycles of disaster and environmental issues that continue to resurface. Another artist that I've been working with to build a connection is Italian-born artist Guzmano Cesaretti, a photographer based in Pasadena who since the 1970s has made some of the most significant portraits of Southern California's Mexican-American community in East Los Angeles. And he's most famous for this book, Street Writers, featuring Chicano graffiti. This was actually even used as in Chicano studies departments as a text in their coursework, which I think is really important. He happened to also work as a staff photographer at the Huntington in the early 1970s. So there's also a layer of intriguing institutional history to our conversations that we're having. So these are just a couple of examples where he worked with this artist Chaz, as well as learned about the different lowrider gatherings and a car club called the Click that he worked with continually over several years in the 70s. And he would often return to the different neighborhoods and give prints back to the people who he had photographed, really becoming, a lot of the folks I've talked to, it's like they call him family. He's like a member of the family. So a little bit more on the Laura Aguilar collection as I'm starting to wrap up here. I'm pleased to say that we are in the process of planning to display a selection of this work as part of the American Art Gallery's rotations that we're going to have in 2026 and 27. And last year, we just received another gift of 79 prints from the Aguilar estate. So this makes the Huntington, I think, a key destination for accessing and researching Aguilar's work. This is an iconic self-portrait called In Sandy's Room, and this was actually made in a place that she was house-sitting just a couple of miles away from the Huntington. It represents her early interest in nude self-portraits. The large format print was featured in the 2008 exhibition that we had at the Huntington. It was an exhibition called The Site of Paradise. And so it's kind of returning to the Huntington because at the time, we did not purchase it. And I think that that says a lot too in terms of marking the change here and how we are changing how we want to build our collections today. From 1984 to 1992, Aguilar documented Day of the Dead celebrations, and we also have these really incredible works in our collection. And a lot of these are not as well known, and that was also part of why we wanted to bring them into the collection and give them more visibility. She actually constructed that large coffin that you see behind each of the people that are posing inside of it, and a lot of the people are these vibrant artists and creative people and friends of hers that were part of the Chicana community, including Harry Gamboa, Barbara Carrasco. These are just a couple of examples. And other significant works from this series include couples and families in their homes, ready to embark on Day of the Dead celebrations. And I needed to share this quote because when we put some of this material on social media, the woman in the center in the family portrait, her name is Consuelo Flores, and she saw that and wrote, I'll have to read this. "Thank you for sharing this photo taken of my family and me so many years ago. Both of my sons, pictured here, are now fathers themselves and are continuing the tradition of celebrating Dia de los Muertos while honoring and remembering our dead. Laura was a wonderful and thoughtful artist, focusing on documenting contemporary Mexican-American families and culture. I continue to honor her spirit and appreciate the work she did." So things like that are very meaningful and make me want to, again, reach out more, learn more. We're hoping to conduct actual oral histories with a lot of the folks that Laura photographed, and hoping again to add another layer to this work. This is an example too from a series called Plush Pony that she did of a Chicano lesbian bar in El Sereno called Plush Pony. And these portraits feature lesbians who are posing in front of a cloth backdrop that Aguilar actually set up herself. And it's a very intimate group, and there's at the same time there's a lot of camaraderie. And when again this was announced on social media, someone saw this image and we already got a response. "Oh, that's my aunt on the left. I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud she's out here." So we're getting a lot of these responses, which is great. And to the extent too that we invited a lot of the family and friends and people who were originally in her photographs to come to the Huntington and have a gathering on Laura's birthday, October 26th. To celebrate her and to honor what we have here. This is Yolanda Mora there posing with her original portrait from the Day of the Dead series. And there were some tears and laughter and memories, and it was a really remarkable day that we were able to have everyone over. So lastly, I want to talk a little bit about an exhibition that I'm working on right now with my colleague Josh Garrett Davis, who's the curator of Western American history. The Huntington is using this occasion of the 250th anniversary to present a larger initiative that we're calling This Land Is ... The ... is very important. And it tells a very, let's say, a deeper history about place, reflecting on the way that land has been central to American history, identity, and culture, and acknowledging that the present-day territory of the U.S. has long been both common and contested ground. The show is going to respond to topics in a myriad of ways, looking at mapping, dispossession, cultivation, extraction, regenerative practices, as well as spiritual and aesthetic relations to the land. But we're really taking what we're calling kind of a multivocal approach, and maybe taking this a little too literally, but in this case, we're actually doing things like pairing our copy of the Declaration of Independence, which admittedly has a lot of sort of unpolished qualities to it. It has very raw kind of nature to it and draftiness to the point that there are actually a tally of New York votes on the back of it, on the verso. And so we wanted to kind of outline that kind of unfinished quality, as well as think about how we can think of points of resistance or ways in which other voices need to be heard. And so we actually found the guitar of Woody Guthrie, which has carved on it, "This machine kills fascists." So on its verso. So thinking again about how these two types of objects and from history can kind of play with each other and push against each other through the show is the kind of tone that we're trying to reach with this show. This is a group of objects that we found in a Japanese American archive at the Huntington that we're using as a kind of case study model. This is the Kuromi family. As you see at the top, they actually had a flower farm in Los Feliz in the 1920s, and they're standing there proudly on their land, but then followed by incarceration at the Gila River Indian Reservation in Arizona during World War II. And then we also, and so you see actually there's a map of the Gila Reservation there, and then, or the Gila Relocation Center, and then a watercolor of the same scene. And it's interesting too, because we're looking at intertwined and overlapping histories of land because it was on Diné land. And so we're going to actually work with artists on this presentation as well, thinking about Japanese American and Diné histories that are part of this particular site. And here, lastly, I'm bringing in that Aguilar photo again that I started with, this time juxtaposed with this iconic Civil War landscape featuring the bodies of dead soldiers in the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg. Photographed on July 4th, 1863 by O'Sullivan and printed later by Alexander Gardner. This appeared in the photographic sketchbook of the war, and it conveyed different levels of harvest. It's known as the harvest of death. And their bodies have been stripped of belongings, including their shoes. And it's also a harvest in the sense that their bodies are actually being soaked by the rain. And so we're actually working with something like this, thinking about these two types of images in the same exhibition, creating a kind of stark and poignant thinking about commentary on land, a reflection on American history, but also thinking about cycles of profound loss and regeneration at the same time. So these are just a few samples from the exhibition. And then lastly, I want to end on curators as a community. This is a screenshot of a group of us who all graduated from Wisconsin at different points, meeting over Zoom in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. We all look very serious and have very concerned looks on our faces for good reason. But it was a community that I knew I could turn to. And we all took different paths to get there, but our time and experiences at UW-Madison anchored us. So nearly 5 years later, as we embark on the next set of challenges before us, especially in the current political climate, our roles as curators feel more critical than ever. I hope that we can make more dialogues like this in spaces to learn from each other, to share pathways and resources, to listen and forge ahead for the next generation of curators. So thank you. Question? Yeah.
We're going to do something really awkward, which is that so our guests can hear, we're going to pass the mic around. Thanks so much.
Thank you for a terrific talk. I'm wondering, in the arc of your experience, if you might share which works have been most successful in terms of engagement, and maybe which ones have failed and why, and you know, just sort of what's behind making it work from a public interaction perspective. Yeah.
That's a really good question. I feel like sometimes it depends too on the infrastructure around it and how it's presented. So for example, that Bay Area Walls initiative that I talked about with Irina Alejo, that got a lot of responses because it was around the time of the pandemic. It was a response to the pandemic. It had local voices. It had images and recognizable things, especially to people in the Bay Area. And so we got a lot of responses from that, visceral as well as emotional and intellectual, of course. And so I find sometimes it really is, sometimes it depends about the armature around how you present things. The show, I didn't talk about it in this presentation, but that was mentioned in the introduction at SF MoMA on the train, RFK's last journey. That was also very intense because people who remembered that day when RFK was assassinated crying in the galleries, just openly crying, looking at some of the images. And so that was very impactful in terms of seeing a direct emotional response. We had a notebook that people could share thoughts in and things like that. And so that was also a way that we could at least understand what people were really feeling, because most people wanted to have just a private moment of reflection and grief in that moment. So it was interesting to read some of the memories that people were having too of that day. Less responsive, I'm trying to think of, because sometimes I do, I mean, any curator will tell you, you go in the galleries and you look and you observe and you look for behavior. I don't want to name the artist, but there was an artist whose work was not as well received, I'll put it that way. And it just didn't seem to have that, it might have been a little too, I don't know, cold maybe for people to understand aspects of it. So sometimes it takes, but that's our job too, is to make it accessible and to try to find the right way to, explain things that are attainable too. So I learned from that. Yeah. Sorry, I know, sorry. Oh yeah, the pass, okay, sorry.
Hi, yes, I have a very kind of practical, basic question.
Sure.
I'm teaching a class on the museum this semester. Some of my students are here, and I wonder, you're talking about acquiring things for the museum, and one of the things we're exploring this semester is kind of where curatorial choice comes in, where pre-existing collections come in, where, donors come in. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of take us through the process of when you're acquiring something, how that works at the library.
Sure.
And
sure.
who are the constituents, and how does the process go?
Sure. And it's different at every institution. So specifically at the Huntington, and specifically at the Huntington Library, we have a library council that we do sort of larger presentations and larger, let's say, higher end purchases that we present. And so that is one kind of channel in which we are able to present work. So that early work on the Philippines, I was able to present that to that group, and we were able to bring it into the collection that way. There are the purchases and things that I bring in other ways. I actually do the research that I, Oh, good question. Yeah. So they are different donors, basically, who pay a certain amount to be on the council and to have that voice and that representation in terms of what comes into our collection. We also have things though like a library committee, which is a different entity, and that doesn't necessarily weigh in on acquisitions, but they just have we sort of explain things to them about programming and different things that are going on at the Huntington, and they support us programmatically in different ways. So there's kind of different groups that we work with, some that are more directly related to acquisitions, and some that are more related to specific content areas. When it comes to acquisitions that are a certain dollar amount, let's say, I actually do the research, and I do, we call them assessments of it, and come up with a justification after I've figured out, oh, is this something that we want to bring to the collection? How does it relate to other areas of our collection? What is its research value? That is actually a specific thing that we ask ourselves at the Huntington because of our mission. And so I put that together, and then I actually present that to our library director, and I get the funds that way. That is not how it happened at SF MoMA. SF MoMA, there's an acquisitions committee, a council, and you present things there. And so there's different ways too that you are able to kind of get things into the collection. I also, because of photography, the price points are very different for photography than, say, medieval manuscripts. So I am able to actually, if something is $5,000 or under, I am able to just bring that into the collection on my own without, I mean, I do still do a justification and write-up, but I'm able to bring that in just with my approval. Yeah, so that's the nitty-gritty.
Thank you so much, Linde. This was great. You sort of opened talking about your formal analysis skills, which you displayed remarkably here today. But I'm curious, we have a lot of students here. My colleague mentioned some students of hers here, some potential graduate students coming into the program. From your perspective, especially having traversed all of these different experiences and institutions, what can we do here at Madison, or what would you encourage students to do? So it can be advising the faculty on how to train students, or encourage students to do if they want to embark on a curatorial path in 2025 or later.
Solid question. Maybe one to continue also tomorrow. Yeah, no, that is really important to think about in terms of training now and what that actually looks like. I would say working with as many objects and materials and tangible things as possible, as much as we are in this digital world and space and of remote this and that, really being able to see as many things in person, not just in terms of collection objects, but also going to exhibitions and looking at closely at exhibitions content-wise, but also just how was that framed? Why is that in the same case as that? What is that? The mechanics of that is something that just becomes a part of your daily life as a curator, that you have to know all the ins and outs of that anyway. So really understanding, like meeting with other curators, or listening in on museum tours or things like that that allow you to see how things and how narratives are actually being constructed in an exhibition space. That would be, I think, really important and valuable to take that time to do it. We also bring a lot of students from all walks of life, like I said, third graders to to college and graduate students in, and we actually get a lot of, I love teaching with the collection, because usually a lot of the students then come through, find some aspect of that collection and build whole papers and theses off it, and are able to really understand its role, not only in terms of an academic life, but also why it's at an institution, why it landed there, why is it staying there? How does it connect with other things? So those are experiences too that I think are really important and valuable to understanding the bigger picture.
Sorry, I'm right in the middle. Yeah, so one part of your talk that really kind of struck me was when you were talking about kind of including the security guards at SF MoMA. And I was just wondering if there was any similar approach at the Huntington right now, where you're including service maintenance workers, kind of interspersing them in your practice.
Very good question. So in terms of my particular practice, I have not been able to do that because I haven't found the entry point quite yet. But one of my colleagues, who his name is Clay Stalls, he used to be there as the curator of Hispanic and California collections. He's since retired, but before he left, he conducted oral history projects with all of the people that work on the grounds, many of whom are Mexican American and have been part of the Huntington's history in terms of labor and land for generations. So he was able to conduct interviews all in Spanish, and with the help of actually a professor at Whittier College who facilitated a lot of those interviews, and then also did some photographs of them, those who were comfortable with being photographed. So that project as a whole exists at the Huntington as a kind of archive of the histories of labor on the Huntington grounds. But we hope to do more with that. For example, showing that, making sure the interviews are available digitally, having people be able to really access that too and understand the stakes of it.
As long as I'm selfishly holding the microphone, I was so struck by your cultivation of relationships, and maybe it's most obvious in your very delicately worded that somehow you were able to persuade one of the artists to move from zine making to photography. And I'm so curious what that persuasion was. I mean, it sounds like a commission, but maybe it wasn't. But maybe you could tell us some more about those cultivated relationships that feel like a different way of working besides just, I mean, as significant as it is presenting something to the committee to acquire something, this is a longer term, more durational aspect of your cultivation of, in your title, right, communities and collections. It feels like an aspect of that is cultivating relationships with makers too.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I mean, as an art historian, first and foremost, artists are what allow me to see and to understand and to grasp so many things about the life and world around us. And so it is an honor anytime an artist allows me into their studio and into their space in order to have a conversation, even on a most fundamental level about their work. So a lot of the times it starts with reaching out and just saying, can I do a visit? I just want to learn more. And then from there, it's a very intimate space, the studio, or it's not always a formal studio. Maybe it's an apartment. Maybe it's a room in a house, you know. So you have these interactions that are already kind of set up as very close and one-to-one. And so through those interactions and through that time spent, you can't help but find connection. And so, for an example, with Valerie, I actually saw her, I'm going to go and say it, I saw her work on Instagram. But that's the thing, it's a vehicle. And I had actually seen those, the signs from Historic Filipino Town of all the different stores, and I said, whoa, I feel like I haven't seen someone really doing that, like actually photographing that part of the city. And so I reached out to her. She lives in Long Beach, and she had spread all of her stuff out on her table, and we just poured over it. And it was zines, there was some photographs, but she is really more comfortable in just that in the zine format. And so we ended up spending that day getting to know each other, and then just continuing the conversation a little bit over email, a little bit over text, you know, that kind of thing. And then in the end, she said, you know what, she actually saw William Camargo's work, and she liked how he had set up a portfolio and done all of this thing. And she said, you know what, I think I would like to explore that too for my work. So that was another way too that she saw another artist, young artist and emerging artist in our collection, and what he had done with his existing imagery. And she thought, that is actually really powerful to me too. And so she kind of took that as a cue on top of the conversations that we had. So these things really do evolve in different ways. I didn't mean to sound like I was, you know, persuading her, but it kind of did just happen that way. And then she made the actual portfolio box she made herself, and told me about a lot of different ways that she worked on its construction, and then had the 80 prints that were put in it. She had those printed, but it felt right by the end, and I think we were very happy. And we also got zines as well as part of the whole group. So we're really pleased that her work is part of the collection.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so rich. Thank you so much. Really, really excited to have you with us, and we'll continue the conversation over the reception outside. Thank you.
Thank you.